Hello, today I'm here in Paris. In a few days, Paris will be hosting the 30th Olympic Games and the 17th Paralympic Games. I've been a fan of Olympics since 1980 when I watched the first Olympic that I remember, which was the Moscow one. I never forget the little bear, Misha, crying at the last days of the Games. But Olympics is not only about the fun and athletes overcoming themselves and becoming superhuman. There is a dark side to Olympic Games that's not so much discussed. The model of financing an Olympic today, it's not sustainable. And the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is finding harder and harder to find new candidates to host the Olympic Games. This awareness has started since the 2004 Athens Olympic Games, where it dragged Greece into a financial crisis that lasts until today. I come from Rio de Janeiro, and the same thing happened in the city. We've been paying the bill until today, and the legacy is just not enough for the city. But what drives countries and cities who want to pay that price and host the Games? Well, countries are looking to promote themselves, bring new business, and more tourists. But is it really worth the price? How much does an Olympic really cost? What's the legacy that's there? And what's the benefit, in fact? We're going to discuss those three questions in this video. Stay with us. But how much does really an Olympic game cost? This is the second time that Paris is hosting the Games. The first time was exactly 100 years ago. At that time, the event was much smaller. There was many athletes, many countries, many categories of sports in the middle of the event. Now, the Olympics is a giga event with billions of people watching all over the world. And as so, it requires countries to invest billions and billions of dollars. The last three Olympics together costed to the countries $51 billion only in constructing the venues for the events, not counting into that all the infrastructure that needs to be there to support the Games. That includes roads, trains, metros, airports, and so on. The winning bid for Paris Games, it was supposed to be at a lower cost of $3.4 billion. And now, it's already estimated that the Games, on with the sport venues, will cost around $8 billion. Cost overrun is the norm for the Olympic Games. The most reliable data for the Games comes from a study from the Oxford University led by Professor Prof Flyvbjerg and Alexander Butzer. They gathered data from the Olympic Games since 1960, starting at Rome, until today. They have come to the conclusion that all the Olympic Games until today had a cost overrun, in average 150%. The French Olympics is already about 110% above its expected cost. But what is driving this cost overrun in every Olympic Games? Well, there are several reasons. When a city is proposing to host the Olympic Games, it has a plan. It says, I'm going to build these venues and I'm going to build this infrastructure so people can get in and out and get to the venues, and that's therefore. But at that moment, they don't know exactly how they will do it and what are the real requirements that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and the other sport committees will request. I have lived that myself. I have witnessed that in the Rio International Airport. When we were preparing the airport to host the 2016 Rio Olympic Games, we had a project on what was needed for the airport to operate. We knew how many flights and how many athletes we were going to receive, but we didn't know in detail what would be the full requirements from the IOC. We had to adapt, and we had to be very creative not to have a cost overrun. But that it's not always possible with such a mega event. And most important, the date cannot be delayed. When a city is hosting such an event, It's so important. It will impact so much in the image of the country and the city that they cannot afford to have something that's just not working. So at the last moment, they do not count the costs. They really pay everything that's necessary to make sure that they will make the best games ever. And for that, when they sign the contract, they say that they will take all the costs overrun. It will be on their behalf. That means they are taking the risk of all the cost overrun that will happen in the games. And the worst, they consider already that there will be cost overrun. And this is like what Professor Flyvbjerg says, it's just like giving a blank check to the Olympic Committee to decide how they're going to throw a party in your house. They're going to throw a party and you're going to pay all the bill. And that is just one of the reasons why you have the cost overruns. You have to remember that those cities are also building together with the Olympic venues very complex infrastructure projects, which themselves are already a big headache for everybody. Normally, those projects, they finish over cost and over time. And remember here, we are talking there cannot be an overtime. So they need to build metro, trains, and new airports. Very complex infrastructure projects that needs to be designed and executed in the space of 8 years. And sometimes that is just not possible. Another point that contributes to that is that when they are building those new venues for the sport and also that complex infrastructure that needs to be there to host the games, everybody wants to be iconic. Everybody wants to do their best. Everybody wants to have the most beautiful and the newest technology on their stadiums, on their airports. And that is an invitation for delays and cost overrun. So what we have seen so far since 1960 is what Professor Flyvbjerg shows in his study. There's always been a cost overrun through the Olympics. Rio de Janeiro, where I came from, I already said that, is paying that bill until today. And it's not funny. Only one company holding like 3 or 4 of those infrastructure that needed to be there for the Olympic Games. When the Games were finished, they were hiring maybe 30,000 people. When the work was finished, everybody was unemployed and still living on that city. That is dramatic. When bidding for the Games, governments needs to be really aware if they can afford to pay the bill, because the impact to the citizens can be long-lasting. But what really motivates countries and cities to host Olympics? And normally governments justify it as a boost in an economy, in tourism, in infrastructure, and the legacy that should stay for the city. Well, you can argue on that based on the experience of Greece, Rio de Janeiro, or even Tokyo. Here in France, lots of the venues that are going to be done for the Games will be temporary and dismantled after the Games. Only the swim arena will remain, and all the others will not be there. That was not the case in Rio and Athens, for instance. In Athens, the facilities built for the Games are becoming ruins, and in Rio, they are going to the same path. There was huge infrastructure built only for the Games that should be used by society afterwards. But after the Olympics was finished, the city went bankrupted, and the government just could not afford to maintain and operate the sports facilities that were built. Some of that legacy is good for the city, and that is mainly from the transport part of it. In Rio, we got a brand new airport, which was really necessary. We had enhancement of the BRT, bus rapid transport, and also the metros. Paris used the Olympic Games also to enhance its already famous metro network, and of course it has to do refurbishment in the airports. So there is a legacy that the Olympics leave. The best example of it is Barcelona. But after Barcelona, no other city was so successful in really getting that legacy to have a return and a benefit to society as it is. In my case, in Rio, it was a tragedy. It really, the city really went bankrupted with a lot of people unemployed and with no economic value at all. I hope that Paris have learned the lessons and legacies will be better and the French people will be able to enjoy what's going to be there after the Games. One of the arguments that's used by governments to host an Olympic is that Olympic Games will give visibility to the country, bring more business and enhance the number of tourists. But let's face it, does Paris need more tourists? I'm not sure of that. Paris, together with Rome, London and Barcelona, is one of the most visited places in the world. It already has a huge number of tourists, and having more of that, maybe it's not so beneficial to the city on the long run. Of course, during the Games, the number of tourists will increase, and that will give some kind of profit to the city. But is that enough to cover the costs of the game and to justify them? Not sure of that. From my experience in Rio, that was not what happened. Rio invested a lot on its game, but it did not have the benefits of tourists in the future. And also, in the last weeks, what we have seen is a lot of protests, especially in Barcelona, against mass tourism. The number of tourists is so big in the city, it has put pressure on the real estate, and the locals complain that costs of living have just increased, that all the developments and projects are all for the tourists and not for the local, and that they hardly see the benefits of the huge amount of people that goes there. So, in a city like Paris, is the Olympics good or bad for the city? I leave that question to you. As potential candidates to host the Olympics are pulling out their offers from the bid, the IOC started to think, how can they make Olympics more sustainable to countries and cities? Paris is going to implement all the new plan that the IOC has developed until today. Behind me, there is a temporary venue that will host the beach volleyball competition. Together with temporary facilities, Paris is also using old venues to host other games. And they only constructed 3 new venues to host all the games. This is part of the plan to reduce the costs and make it more sustainable. When the whole cost of the games will be consolidated, we'll be able to see if those measures worked or not, if the cost is being reduced or not.